Hi guys, this is Si from SiNi Software. I'm just going to talk about the SiClone plugin that we have for 3D Studio Max. We're going to do this sort of more detailed video, sort of go over a lot of the items in here. So with that said, for what SiClone is it distributes objects along a spline. So obviously you're going to need a spline and some objects. So let's take a look. The first panel in here basically is just the icon size and tell you whether your software is up to date or if there's a new version to download. Next areas are objects, so we can pick our spline to go in this, and then our distributed objects. What we have is we have 3 trees. One has a bend modifier on it. The others are just objects themselves. So our first button here is just picking objects individually. The next button will open up a dialog, so you can just simply select all the stuff you want to add and add it in. Next object or button will obviously remove it. The N are null objects, so you can actually introduce blank spaces in here if you want to use those. Those are useful if you're doing sort of, like I said in the other video, parking lots, so you can remove some cars so you don't have a full parking lot. There's a lot of reasons why you could use these. They come in pretty handy. Right now we'll just get rid of them. And then you have, if you're using this in an ordered fashion, you can shift the order of these around for which way they get displayed. Updating objects. So to save time and actually let me just get this into, say, let's do point cloud mode. So if I have an object here and I want to update that, so if I change the bend on it, we don't want our plugin constantly going and checking these objects whatsoever for changes, because it does, I mean, we did that for a little while and it was slowing it down. So if you do need to update your objects, just hit update and it'll go refresh all your objects instead of the plugin checking back and forth each time. So let me just go and get this guy. Well, actually, I'm just going to get rid of that all together, and we'll go back and update. All right, if you're exporting and you want to export, say you have these objects hidden or they're just off in the scene somewhere else, and you want to export this out to another scene, if you hit select SiNi objects, it's going to select everything that needs to be exported. So the objects themselves, the spline, you can simply say save as. So that's what that button there for, is select SiNi objects. Drawing modes. We have 2 main modes. We have draw lines and draw mesh. So these are all sorts of shapes, so you can display as none, dots for each object, triangles. Now the way the triangle works is it takes the height of the object and it does a variation on that. It just draws the triangle per height. The width is a standard width for the ratio of the triangle. Bounding box and point cloud. And what we're doing with point cloud is we're taking minimum, it displays 10, and then 100% it displays 3000. So we're not going overboard with displaying sort of birds. The meshing objects, we have pyramid, which works on the same, well, you have none. You have pyramid, which works on the same way as the triangle, sort of just gets the height of the object and does a uniform pyramid. We have bounding box, squirrel, just in case you need to show things as a squirrel, and the original object. Original object is going to be a little slower than all the rest because it does have to go through and reference all that. But you still do need it. Say if you had cars and you want to see which way they're, which direction they are, I might not always be able to tell with a point cloud, exactly where you're at. But for now, let's go back. Let's just display this as pyramids. Now, it does scale down. So our next is our spacing. But if I do scale these objects down and I make our spacing smaller and smaller and smaller, it will get to a point where it's going to say there's too many polys. I'm going to switch you to none or bounding box or something like that, because we did go down to 0001, which is not a lot of spacing. So let's set this back to pyramids. Okay, so what we have is we have a random pattern, which will just, like it says on the tin, gives you a nice random pattern to what you have selected. We have an ordered pattern, which is like what I said. It'll go through and just go through this order and display those along the path. We have a follow spline, which probably if I show this in bounding box, you'll get a better idea. So follow, of course, like it does, follows the spline. You have spline orientation as well. So if I was to take this shape, and let's just raise this up here a little bit. If you go into orientation, it's going to tilt the objects on the spline itself. So this is good for like roller coasters, or say you're going up over a hill and you're drawing your line sort of with snapping it to the face of a mountain. This will work for sort of some objects, you know, depending on what you're doing. And then of course our spacing. So that'll make a difference to how many objects you have. Transformations. All right, I am actually just going to put this back down for a second, and oops, selected it all. Let's just get that one. All right, lower that back down to where we were, to normal. All right, transformations. You can change their transformation by all the objects or the individual objects themselves. And then you also have random transformations. So let's say you can move all these objects up or down, in or out, rotation, and scale. It's all real-time feedback, so it is pretty quick for figuring out what you're doing. I mean, even if you were to take a line here and say, you know, create me a line, it's just going to go draw out exactly what you have on that, any sort of that part of that spline. So it is pretty quick feedback. All right, random transformations. So it is going to do, this is always going to be a lower number, that's always going to be higher. So if you did go back into it, like we had these numbers as a higher number, it's going to readjust that. So let's just go zero these out for a minute. And the scale themselves. All right, so random transformation. So if we want this to be, say, minus 360 to 360, you'll get a good variation out of this. You want it sort of in and out. Don't forget your negative number is the bottom, so in and out. Let's raise this up. So it gives you a good like spread of trees. Let's put this back to a random pattern, so sort of give us some good feedback, and let's put some nulls in here as well. So sort of really spread some stuff out all over the place. Now, if you had one object that happened to be not at the right height, you wouldn't have to go in, take the object, change its transformation. I can actually go into, say, the one tree and say, just raise that one tree up, or just rotate that one tree. So you do have a lot of good feedback on what you can do once they're already in this plugin. Mirror itself. Mirror is an interesting one. Where we came up with this one was at one point we were doing a parking lot, and all the cars were parked in forward, and which didn't make any sense. So we wanted some way that we could actually rotate these objects. So unlike above, this is an this or that number. So if we were to set this to, say, 0 and this to 180, it's going to rotate some of them a random amount. You can reseed this item as well. Now we're not seeing much because it's bounding box. There's nothing really to change. But in cars here, you actually would see the car flip around. Exclusion splines. Okay, let's just draw a line out here real quick. And if I had this spline animate over time. So let's go turn on auto key. And let's just take this spline, we'll spread it out here, and this guy over here, just to sort of give us something. Now this exclusion spline works on the Z axis. So actually, I don't have it all on the Z. Let me just flatten this guy here a minute. Hold on 1 second. And yeah, I'm just gonna open up some tools here and flatten this spline. Okay. These are other tools. We'll go into these a little later. There are going to be other plugins that we're going to be releasing soon. But they are really useful. There's a lot of spline tools and other things. But I'll make a video on that today. We'll sort of touch on some of the other stuff we have. All right, so let's get back into this. And I'm going to add, I have this spline that should animate over time. So let me just turn on auto key. And let's just get you back over here, you over here, and you over here. Let me just make sure that's, of course. Third time's a charm. I don't even think I turned on auto key in the first time. There we go. All right, so we have an animated spline. So if we were to go through this, enable exclusion splines and select, over time what this is going to do is going to just get everything that's in the spline and animate it disappearing. The reason we added this is we had a forest and we sort of drew all this out and we wanted to have it disappear over time. With all sorts of different scatter programs, you couldn't just turn down the amount because stuff would pop all over the place and it would reseed itself, so you couldn't just get these things to slowly disappear or come in. So that's how the exclusion splines, how we added those in. All right, next thing, color shift and variation. I think I covered this pretty well in the first video, in just the brief one. And I don't really have any materials. Actually, I think I do. I have materials on these. What color variation will do? Let me just do a quick sort of render here of our trees. All right, I'm going to actually turn down the spacing on this, and we will get a good amount of trees in here. All right, even to the point where it goes down to, let's just turn this up just a little more. And set this to pyramid. All right, so we have a good amount of trees in there. All right, I am going to pause this. I'm going to do a quick render, and we'll get a good amount of trees in here, so just bear with me. All right, so did a quick little render here, and like we can see, you know, it does look like a 3D scene because all the trees are the exact same color. And there's no sort of, I mean, it's nice that they're twisted and, you know, they have some, we haven't even done any random rotation yet. I think we did. No, we didn't do any random scale. But the problem with that is you always render this out and it never looks good because they're all the same color. So you need some sort of variation in color. So if we were to take this, and actually let's just do a variation in scale as well. Just have some of these a little smaller, some of these a little bigger as well. Maybe not that big, a little smaller. All right, so we have a good variation in that. Let's go turn on color shift, and let's do a variation of, say, 25 different textures. And we want a hue shift, very little, saturation, yeah, medium, brightness, and contrast. You'll have to sort of play around with this and sort of figure out, there's no real set numbers. And like I said in the first video, is we give you the full range of hue shift, which also, by the way, does not work on pure white and pure black. If you were to throw a color correct on pure white or pure black and you did a hue shift, there would be no change in it. So you want to watch what you do for sort of colors. We're trying to find a different way around that to make it a little better so it works with everything. But play around with this stuff and sort of see and let us know, you know, what ideas you have or what features you'd like to see in this. So I can filter by material as well. So I can say don't do any bark, and we'll add this, and then we'll say exclude, and so it's going to exclude any color, any textures that are called that. So let's just take a look at our textures, and in here we have, yeah, bark tree. Let's see what the other ones have. This one's just called bark. So anything like that, like a wild card, it's going to pick up as well. So let's do a new render of this. And I'm just going to pause this while we render this real quick. All right, so our render is just finishing up here, and you can see, you know, it's done all those trees in just 4 minutes. So it's not too bad. It's pretty quick at figuring this stuff out. So 25 textures. Variations were pretty good. I mean, you see there's some dark, light trees. You could probably, I mean, you'd want to sit down and sort of play around with these levels and sort of, you know, get them to exactly where you want. I mean, I'm just sort of doing a video, so this is just a first guess on where I'm going to slide these out to get a nice variation. But do remember, the main thing about this is, I mean, you can bring this up. You can bring this up to, I think, yeah, you can bring it up to 400. The more texture variations that you use, the more RAM it's going to use. So just be careful about that. I mean, just think about what you basically need. 50 would have been fine. I probably could have rendered this, or even 100 variations in textures would have been all right. But you do have to watch the RAM, and Max has a max texture of 500 different textures that you can retain at one time. So if you have, say, cars with 45 submaterials on each, and you do 50 variations and you have 12 different cars, it's going to cap out on textures. So just sort of watching what you do with that. But generally a variation of sometimes with 12 or 20 or 25 is going to be plenty of variation in color and for these trees. So let's see, what else do we have? We have camera clipping. The way this works is Max doesn't give us a lot of play with callbacks in between frames, so we're going to be dealing with that with a different plugin, with a camera plugin in the future. But for right now, is if you enable camera clipping and you don't have a camera in your viewport, it's going to go out and it's going to render what's in your viewport. It's going to build what's in your viewport alone. If you had an animation, we're not going to be able to build geometry in between frames, and that's something to do with Max. So what we do is we use a visibility track and a couple of different other ways of hiding geometry for camera clipping, which does actually help on some stuff for speed wise. You can select a camera itself, or you can say active view camera. So if you were to do versioning on cameras and you're working on the scene and you want to copy that camera and do something new, you don't have to remember to come back here and swap your camera. Whatever camera you send to render with is going to work with active view. So most of the time you want to use this active view. Expansion itself on the camera. So with the expansion set, and this is something you play around with depending on scale, is how much it's going to expand. So you don't want it to stop casting shadows on these trees itself. You want to add a little expansion to it no matter what. Export. We do have a limit of stuff that you're going to export, because of course if you had 3 million of these trees in here and you tried to export these as single objects, it wouldn't work. So you just have too many nodes in your scene. You have hundreds of millions of polys in your scene. You wouldn't be able to move around, and it would probably hang for a while. So we are capping that at a max. So if I had way more trees in here than I do now, these would actually be disabled. And like I said, it would just freeze up max. There's no way you'd be able to take out 200 million of these trees at, 100,000 polys a piece. So And then that's about it. The last thing is, if you're having problems with the plugin, there is also just a plugin status down here of not connected to server. All in all, that's pretty much everything that we have in our SiClone at the moment. This is free to send to the farm, so if you're running this in command line, it won't need a license to render with, like most plugins. But if you are working in it, you are going to need to have a license. If you were to give this to somebody else without a license, command line wise, it would still render. But yeah, you do have to have a license to use it. We are in our beta right now, so do let us know if you have any thoughts, stuff you want us to add to this, or ideas. Let us know in the support forum. Thanks a lot, guys. Have a good one. See ya.